Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is going to be a thorough masterclass on prototypes and what prototypes are in JavaScript. Bottom line is this: everything in JavaScript is an object. Okay, arrays are objects, sets are objects, maps are objects, functions are objects. So everything, and the way all these different functions work, all these different objects work, is they generally have some sort of object that acts as their sort of reference. Okay, so where do all those array methods exist is on what's called the array prototype. Where do all the function stuff exist? On the function prototype. So let's just do this real quick. Console.log array.prototype. Let's see what we get. Okay, let me get this out of the way. So node testing.js. Okay, and you get an empty array. This is because that's the prototype. You don't see all the methods in there. But just to give you another example of how this all works, let's create an object. Const my proto equals, and this will be a function, a object that has a property called a num, which is 5, and then a function called greet, okay, which is just going to console.log hello. So we have this object, okay, and right now I can use this object like any other object. I could do something like my proto.greet. Okay, and if I run that, well, it'll complain. Let's see why it's complaining. Hello is not defined. Oh, I always forget to make that a string. Okay, if you've been watching a lot of my recent videos, you've probably seen me make that mistake every single time. Okay, hello. Okay, so that works. Now what I can do is I can create a new object, const new obj equals, and then I'm going to use this function called object.set prototype of, and what this does is that I get to first name an object. So I'm just going to create a new object, so an empty pair of curly brackets. So I'm going to say return a new object, but set my proto as the prototype. Cool. And actually, even before we do that, let me just console log my proto. And then I will console log the new object. Okay, so see, my proto has all the properties. The new object doesn't have the properties. But, okay, if I were to do new obj dot greet, that still works. So see, I can still use the greet function on new obj. How is that possible when new obj is just an empty object? The reason is that the way prototypes work is that if the property is not on the actual object, it refers to its prototype. So then what it does, it'll go to its prototype and see if that property exists there. So it says, okay, well, this object does not have a greet function, so let me go check its prototype, which is my proto, and hey, there is a function called greet, so I'll use that. So when you create an array, you're creating a new object, and all those array functions like map, find index, find, filter, they don't exist on that individual array. But when you use them, it's going to go refer to the array prototype and be like, oh, okay, there's all these properties here. Neat. Okay, and that's essentially what prototypes are. So every object has this prototype that it borrows from. Okay, and this is just one way to kind of illustrate that. And then I can actually have another object that takes this one as its prototype, and this is what's called a prototype chain, where one object has a prototype, and that object has a prototype, and that object has a prototype. And again, I always move up the chain to see if I can find that property. So I could have like, the chain could be like 5 objects long, and as long as it eventually finds the property on one of them, it'll use that. Cool. So what if you wanted to create like a new prototype? So a new thing that you can create a new thing that objects sort of look to. I could just do this. I mean, this works. This whole set prototype of function, not the suavest way to do it. Originally, when like JavaScript was created, you had to do it this way. You had to create a function. So we'll say function myProto. Okay. And basically would say like I would create a couple properties like this dot num equals 5. This dot greet equals console.log hello. Save. And so basically whenever I use this, this always represented that function's, the prototype that's attached to that function. So it creates this prototype object that I can then construct new objects from. And how does that work? So let's say const new obj. Okay. I would just say equals new myProto. Okay. And basically what this does, it takes a look at the myProto function, see if it has information that applies to the construction of the prototype, which would be anything with this keyword, this.num, this.greet, and create a new object based on that prototype. So now watch what happens. So let's console.log new obj. Save. Okay, and see now I have a new object created with the of type myProto. So when you're using this is also referred to as a constructor function. Okay, it's a function that constructs objects. Okay, and that's what this means. It says, okay, what is the constructor that constructed this? So we know that this is an object constructed using the myProto constructor of the myProto constructor function. And it has these properties, greet and num. And I can keep just creating new objects like that. Problem is this got really confusing because I can also use this syntax to make normal run-of-the-mill functions that do normal run-of-the-mill function things. So eventually in JavaScript what they did is they said, this is confusing. Okay, how about we let functions be functions? And they created arrow functions that are just run-of-the-mill functions. And they said from now on, if we need to create a constructor function, let's use a word called class. Okay, and I can do class myProto, and then I define my class within those curly brackets. Okay, constructor, and then what it does, instead of when I want to create what's inside part of the prototype, I would just do that inside the basically everything here is me defining the prototype, and then the constructor is the actual function that runs when we create a new one. Okay, so did I misspell constructor? Constructor. Oh, I see why. There we go. Okay, so then I would be here. I would say this dot num equals 5. That's fine. I could do this dot greet here. Now the problem here, and I'll just show you both possibilities. This dot greet equals 5. This dot greet equals console.log hello. Save. So now when I do this, again, it still works, new myProto, because myProto becomes, is going to be the title for the constructor function based on this class. So that's still all, I don't have to change anything. So, but if I run this, I see that greet is on the object, okay? And this is one of the benefits of classes over using the function to create your constructor. Because the function, when you did it before and we used the function as a constructor function, it always adds it to the properties of the new object. Here, I don't necessarily want to do this. I don't want greet there because that means it made a copy of it in this new object, and that means I'm making a copy every time I create a new object. Maybe I don't want that. I'd rather it just refer to its prototype. So what I'll do is I'll move this here. Okay, and just create a method. this way. Okay, save. So now there's a function called greet that's part of my proto. It still works the same way. It does the same exact thing as before, but now, see, you don't see it in my proto. You don't see it in the object. The reason being is that it's not part of the object anymore. It's part of the object's prototype. So when I use greet, it'll then refer to the prototype that's behind. So literally classes in JavaScript are not like classes in other languages. It's literally just an abstraction over this whole prototype concept. Okay, so everything in JavaScript is an object, and every object borrows from other objects, and the object that they borrow from, they can only borrow from one object at a time, and that object is called a prototype. Okay. But again, so basically this whole class thing allows us to create sort of custom structures for objects. But again, how I use it, I have a little bit more flexibility to say, okay, I want this function to be part of the prototype versus something that I add on when I construct the object. Well, before I kind of had to do it when I constructed the object. Okay. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more perspective on what's going on with prototypes. Again, a prototype is just an object that another object refers to. When I use a function constructor, or what a function created construction function, or if I use a class created construction function, all I'm doing is I'm creating a new object that borrows from that prototype. And that's why it says my proto, because that's the name of the constructor function that was used to create it. So that's what's useful. When I create objects, I can see what constructor did it. But what if I wanted to just add stuff to arrays? Okay. The cool thing about prototypes is that I can add to them. So if I wanted to add an array function, if I wanted to do this, I could do array.prototype dot greet equals hello. Okay, and now I can create an array 1, 2, 3 and just do dot hello or dot greet. And now arrays now inherently going forward have this function built into them. Okay. Oh wait, what did I do there? Why did I put it all in one line? So let me put a semicolon there. Put that on a separate line. Save. Where equals hello. Oh, I'm just putting a string. It's just returning a string. That's why. I need to wrap this in a parentheses and actually console log it. There we go. Okay, so if I do this, hello. Okay, and I can make another array. Okay. So if I try this with like another array, I don't know why these parentheses are here. Don't need those there. I could just do another array with a 1 dot greet, and it also can use the same function because they're all borrowing from the same prototype. Cool. But I don't have to add it to the prototype. I could add the function to just an array. But let's say I did this. Let's say, so we'll just do this a little bit differently. My array, my const, my array equals an array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, arrays are objects like anything else, so I could add properties to an array like I could with an object. So I can literally do my r dot greet equals console.log hello. Okay, and then we'll do my r dot greet so you can see that the function works, and then we'll console.log my r so you can see something a little bit different. My r save. Okay, so I can see that the function works, but now I'm not adding it to the prototype. I'm actually giving that individual array the function, which means all other arrays don't have the function. So if I try to create another array, so if I did this, 1, 2, and then do dot greet, this will not work. Because, what happened there? It does not have the function, nor does its prototype have the function. See, it just throws an error. There is no greet function. Okay, so that's the difference between making something the property of the object versus something the property of its prototype. Okay, so I can add stuff to the array prototype if I wanted to. Generally, it's recommended against that, because if you start adding stuff to your array prototype in your code, then your code doesn't necessarily work unless someone else makes sure to add those functions to their prototype later on. This is why libraries like Lodash are created the way they are. Okay, I did create a library where I added a bunch of functions to the array prototype called, I think it's called super array. You can find that on npm. But once people explain to me why that's a bad idea, I recreated the library under what's called better types. So you can find that library also on npm, but there I did it more like, what I did there is I created a whole separate object. So instead of it being part of the array prototype, I created something called a better array, and that better array's prototype has all those functions in it, plus all the existing array functions. That way, it works. So, yeah. That is sort of a thorough explanation of prototypes. Again, prototypes are literally just an object that another object refers to for properties. And the benefit of prototypes is that you don't have to have all these properties on every individual object. You can just have your prototype have all these methods and properties on just the prototype, and every other object just borrows from it. So that's fairly efficient memory wise, because you're not storing copies and copies and copies of every function of every method. The downside is it's a little bit slower for, depending on what the situation is, for it to go traverse your memory to find the prototype versus finding the function on. So there's a trade-off between sort of speed and space. So the execution might be like a couple milliseconds slower, but you're using up less space in your memory, which, if you use up too much memory, could also slow down your executions later on when you don't have enough memory to run the program. So, there's always all these balance of considerations. As far as anything else I want to say about prototypes, but that's it. So again, we saw sort of 3 different ways you can create a prototype. You could just use that set prototype of function, and just say, hey, this object is the prototype of this object. You could do something like create a function, use a function or a class to create a constructor function, and then construct the object. However you feel like doing it, but those are your options. So you guys have a great day and enjoy. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Hopefully this cleared some stuff about objects, cleared some stuff up about functions and classes and all of this stuff going on in JavaScript. Have a great day and enjoy.